Welcome to Live on Live. Thank you for joining us live on live today. You are Jean Duchesne, a special advisor to the Archbishop of Paris. Pope Francis is now back in the Vatican after a 5-day-long tour of Mexico and an historic meeting with Russian Orthodox Patriarch Kirill. That was in Cuba. The visit was short, but it led to some important gesture and call. Now, the Pope is in the news again as he claimed US Republican primary hopeful Donald Trump was not a Christian. The Pope was reacting to Trump's call to keep migrants out. Now, on the visit itself, on the plus side of the papal visit in Mexico, there was the Mass, which focused on immigration at the end of the tour. That was on Wednesday evening. On the border with the USA in Ciudad Juarez, once a black spot for the high number of killings of women and a scene of massive misery for Mexican migrants trying to cross the Rio Grande, across the border. Now, the Mass was attended by 200,000 faithful, but also it was screened across the border to El Paso, to a stadium there where 50,000, an estimated 50,000 people actually watched it. The Pope strongly lashed out against the slavery and grinding poverty to which migrants are often subjected. Now, apart from the comfort his words, his gesture gave to migrants and others, what impact in practice is it likely to have on the US presidential campaign across the border, besides the fierce reaction by Donald Trump?
Well, actually, Donald Trump, the problem is not Donald Trump. I think that the point the Pope tried to make is that politics is not a question of personality. It's not a question of a political platform. It is a question of morals. What is good, what is bad, what is desirable, what is not. And beyond these questions of morals, there's a question of a certain vision of man and the spiritual dimension of man. You see, what the Pope asked people, basically, it seems to me, is that consider that immigrants are not invaders. They are simply poor brothers and destitute brothers and sisters knocking at the door. And the question is, can you sleep peacefully when there is such mystery at your door? That's all.
Now, before the Mass, and also in Ciudad Juarez, the Pope had denounced capitalism, or at least the search for maximum profits, which lead to the exploitation of human beings. Now, our employers and politicians in Mexico and in the free trade area to which Mexico belongs, so the NAFTA group with the USA and Canada, are they likely to listen? Are they likely to change their mind regarding the search for maximum profit?
Well, I think that the Pope, of course, hopes and asks them to change their minds, but also to change their hearts. But he didn't speak to them only. He spoke to everybody. Because all those people, if they make their money, it's because other people buy what they have to sell. And actually, you see, the Pope spoke to everyone, spoke to consumers as well. And he asked them, well, before you buy something, before you contribute to making somebody rich, just try to stop to think about it for a minute. Is what you're going to buy going to do good? Not only to you, but also to a lot of people, to the whole society.
Now, earlier the Pope had gone to the Chiapas province where many indigenous groups live. He apologized to them, as he had done on previous visits to Bolivia, for instance, Ecuador and Paraguay. He apologized for their being excluded from society. But again, how much of an impact will this have, and will there be practical help from the Church following this?
Well, of course, there will be practical help from the church because you see, all Christians know that what the Pope says and asks for is right. But now, of course, this means not just the church as an institution can change anything. The church needs to marshal all goodwills and energy. And this is what the Pope tried to do. Everyone can play his part. Everyone has to participate in what is needed simply to relieve suffering and to help the poor and simply to accept, to be motivated not only by interest but also by disinterested love.
Disinterested love, and yet the Vatican is extremely rich. The Catholic churches, the local Catholic churches, are not always, in fact, very often are poor, particularly in the developing world. Isn't there a contrast there? Could the Vatican not do more to help those churches and the faithful and the local populations in a more concrete way?
Well, actually, no, the church is not some kind of a powerful organization. The church is rich, but it's got much capital, and much capital that's mostly buildings that are very costly to maintain and that cannot be sold. And there is a big difference. The church's income is limited. But the church's strength is to encourage people to roll up their sleeves and do something, because you cannot do anything, you will not undertake anything to help your neighbor if there is not some kind of a faith and love. And the church's job is to encourage and promote that faith and love among as many people as possible.
Well, now the Pope also urged clergy members at a Mass in Morelia in Mocelcan state not to lose heart in the face of violence. Now, he was talking in the state, in the province, where at least 100,000 people, an estimated 100,000 people, including a number of Catholic lay people and of Catholic clergymen and seminarians, lost their lives during the cartel, the drugs cartel war. Now, again, do you think that the Catholic Church can play a meaningful role in fighting the spread of drugs in Mexico?
Well, it is certainly part of its vocation. But once again, the church is not the police, the church is not the government. The church is there to try to convince people to open up to God, to open up to others, and not to seek their own immediate interest only. So what the church seeks is not to bring and implement concrete solutions everywhere. The church is there to try to convince people to convert, to open their minds, to open their hearts, to open their hands, not both to God and to the others.
But at a local level, certain initiatives can be set up in order to translate such search for love into a better life for people, into sort of better understanding of others, more tolerance,
yes,
and more working together.
Yes, but once again, the clergy and committed lay people can start something, but they cannot achieve anything unless they are capable of mobilizing enough people around them, so that it is not the church's initiative, it is a popular initiative. And this is what really will make a difference. So the church can help start things, but things will not be really implemented, will not be achieved if more and more people join an effort which is that of society, that of local community, and not that of the church only.
Now, critics have pointed out that Pope Francis stayed clear of addressing the scandal of paedophile clergy in Mexico during his visit to Mexico, and in particular that of the Legion of Christ congregation, whose leader, Martin Maciel, was accused of committing sexual abuses. In fact, Pope Francis actually pardoned the congregation last October. He also refused to meet the families of the 43 students who were abducted by corrupt police in 2014. Now, why do you think that he stayed away from at least addressing those issues?
Well, actually, I don't know whether he had. I mean, I don't have all the answers to this question because, of course, this depends on the very tight schedules on the Pope's visit. Everybody knows that. Now, it seems to me that a very important distinction has to be made between an institution and its founder, or the people who serve that institution. You know, being a Catholic, being a priest, is not something that is comfortable, where everything is ready-made and you have to follow the path. On the contrary, you receive a lot from God and you've got to transmit it. And there is always a temptation of keeping that for yourself, of using that power for your own interest, of being selfish. And of course, so there is a temptation. There is always a temptation. And I would say the higher you are in the church, the more tempted you can be, which is why I think we can admire that. Actually, what is amazing is not that there should be so many criminal priests, that there should be so few, given all that they are given, all that they receive, and that they therefore can fail to transmit and try to keep for themselves.
But again, in practical terms, I mean, should not so. If we leave the Legion of Christ issue out of the way now, what about the families of the students? Which again goes back to the rottenness of certain parts of society in Mexico. Why not at least make a gesture?
Well, actually, I would have liked, of course, the Pope to be able to make a gesture, but I cannot decide, because I do not know why the Pope was unable, practically, to make that gesture.
On the flight back to Europe yesterday, Pope Francis, when asked about his views on abortion for women at risk of giving birth to deformed children because of the Zika virus, the Pope repeated that abortion was always a crime. However, he hinted that the Church could exceptionally relax the ban on contraception for women at risk of contracting the Zika virus. Now, it sounds like a very orthodox view. Do you think there's a humane touch there as well?
Well, yes, there is a human, but there has always been a human touch. Let me take another example that was more sensitive a few years ago. It is that of condoms in the case of gay relationships. The Church never said that condoms were wrong, but everybody knows that some people have compulsive sex, that they do not control it anymore. It becomes an addiction, and in that case, the Church said, and very clearly, if you should not create a greater evil, and in that case, the use of condom is advisable. So there is no absolute principle. Every case has to be studied, because human variety is such that there can be no universal rule that applies everywhere, that can be applied everywhere blindly. The law is there to help you open your eyes, not to close them.
That regards contraception, but what about abortion?
Well, it is the same kind of moral problem linked to sexuality, and of course the Church says that always the principle is that one should not allow a greater evil, and that if evil cannot be prevented, then it should be limited by all the available means.
But when it comes to abortion is always a crime.
Yes.
It's not really resorting to abortion to avoid a greater evil. It is an evil in itself.
Yes.
And that will never change.
No.
Now, the last question is regarding Pope John Paul II. A documentary revealed, or in fact it was known already, but probably focused more on it, on his 30-year friendship with a Polish-American philosopher, a woman. Now, Pope Francis, when asked, actually commented that a man lacks something if he does not know how to have a good rapport with a woman, and that sexists are sick. Now, again, what do you think of his reaction? which sounds quite healthy.
Well, see, the Church's teaching has always been that woman is equal to man. That's to males, in other words, which actually was one of the contributions of Christianity to humankind. It's not the case everywhere. It's not now. The problem is that today we tend to reduce the relationship between the sexes to sexual activity as such. And of course, this is only part of the truth of the identity of human beings. Personally, I've met and I've known many priests who actually needed women not to sleep with, not to have sex with, but simply because women have their own understanding, their own approach, their own sensitiveness, and that a woman is somebody that a man wants to share something with and can share something with, and she can help him. And I see no reason why relationship between a man and a woman should necessarily lead to sex. When you air such suspicions, you tell more about yourself than about the person you are dealing with.
And to take the matter further, celibacy, as the Pope said, is not part of dogma, so it can change. In other words, as it came late into the history of the Church, even though it simply went back to practice, is it likely to change as it did in the Anglican Church, for instance?
Well, in the first place, it's not so recent. You see, the problem, in fact, does not concern only priests, but it concerns actually the notion of the priesthood, of what does it mean, what does it require to being a priest. So the person who is to offer sacrifices will not be able to do so if he cannot make sacrifices himself, if he cannot sacrifice himself, if he cannot accept not to make the most of his human possibilities. And of course, this is something that is difficult to understand. It is not supposed to be the common lot of people. A priest is somebody who is set apart. This is what sacred means. And therefore, the problem is for us, both for the persons themselves who are ordained, and also for all the others whom they serve, to try to find what will allow everyone, both the priests and their flock, to understand better what their job is, what their mission is. And we can consider that the priestly celibacy is one of the assets of the Western tradition. And for the time being, we see no reason why we should give up this asset.
Jean Duchesne, thank you very much for joining us on Live today.